Why did they always call her that? Just the cook. The words carried a sting sharper than most insults, though no one ever meant them cruelly. At Forward Operating Base Vanguard, people wore titles like Shields, Sniper, Pilot, Corpsman, SEAL. And then there was Ellie Harris, Petty Officer Second Class, Culinary Specialist. 27 years old. Sandy blonde hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Bright hazel eyes that caught more than anyone realized. Hands that could dice onions for 200 soldiers or strip down an M4 carbine in the dark without hesitation. But none of that mattered. When people looked at her, they didn't see capability. They saw food service. They saw stainless steel ladles and trays lined with powdered eggs. They saw someone ordinary. She stirred a vat of soup one evening, the metallic spoon clanging against the side of the pot, when the comment floated across the chow hall again. "She's just the cook." The soldiers at the next table laughed, not unkindly, just dismissive. They were tired, bone-weary from patrols in villages where shadows hid rifles. They needed a little relief, a little superiority over someone safe. Ellie smiled faintly as if it didn't matter, but deep inside the words lodged like shrapnel. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Ellie Harris had been forged in silence, not in applause. She, grown up in rural Montana where silence was survival. Her father, William Bull Harris, had been a Marine Corps sniper instructor, a man whose voice carried across shooting ranges and whose patience could outlast storms. By the time Ellie could ride a bike, she could field strip rifles. By 12, she was tracking elk across ridgelines in snowfall so deep most adults wouldn't dare step into it. Her father's creed had been simple: silence first, patience always, and when the shot comes, make it count. But here at Vanguard, none of that mattered. She wasn't a sniper, wasn't a SEAL, wasn't anyone whose stories made it into debriefs. She was the one who made sure soldiers went outside the wire with full stomachs, the one who received shipments of frozen beef and turned it into sustenance, the one invisible in her importance. And maybe that invisibility was the point. "Outstanding chicken, Harris," Chief Petty Officer Marcus Johnson had said a few days ago, his plate half empty, his tone heavy with casual superiority. "You've got real talent in the kitchen." He'd meant it as a compliment, but to Ellie it was like praising a warrior for polishing boots. She'd smiled politely, professional as ever, but she'd noticed how his eyes had already shifted past her to his men, to the only world he cared about. She wasn't in it. Sometimes she wondered if that invisibility was a blessing. She'd watched other women in combat zones, their presence constantly questioned, constantly measured against invisible scales. She'd chosen culinary specialist not because it defined her, but because it freed her. She could deploy, could serve, could be present in the danger without fighting two wars at once, the one outside and the one inside ranks. Nobody challenged a cook's right to be here. Nobody asked if she was strong enough. They simply dismissed her. Still, the dismissal hurt, because Ellie knew what she carried. She'd scored expert on every weapons qualification quietly. She volunteered for tactical training most support ratings avoided. She learned, absorbed, sharpened herself in corners no one bothered to look. And she told no one, because sometimes the only way to hold power is to keep it hidden until the moment it's needed. That moment hadn't come yet. Not until the Tuesday morning in October that would rewrite everything. It began like any other day. 400 hours. The sky above Vanguard was pale, painted with the dust of another endless sunrise. Ellie rolled out of her cot, boots already waiting, uniform folded with mechanical neatness. She lit the burners in the kitchen tent, the familiar roar of flames her first company of the day. She cracked eggs, stirred pans, kept her mind fixed on tasks that looked mundane but were the backbone of morale. Hungry soldiers were distracted soldiers. Food was fuel, but it was also comfort. In a place where death lurked behind every ridge, comfort mattered. She was plating scrambled eggs when the siren cut through the morning. A voice, clipped and urgent, echoed across the base loudspeakers. All personnel, this is base command. SEAL Team 7 has been ambushed and captured during patrol operations. 12 personnel confirmed held in enemy compound, approximately 5 kilometers northwest of base. QRF mobilizing. The chow hall froze. Forks hovered in midair. Conversations collapsed into silence. Ellie's own hand stopped over the eggs, the spoon dripping yellow onto stainless steel. Her heart skipped, then thudded hard against her ribs. Captured. That word didn't belong here. Seals didn't get captured. They fought until the last round. If the enemy had taken 12 alive, it meant something catastrophic. It meant they wanted spectacle, execution, propaganda. Her mind snapped into a different gear. The cooks kept working. The infantry kept murmuring prayers, but Ellie's thoughts raced. 5 kilometers northwest. She knew the terrain. She'd run those routes before dawn, studying every fold in the earth, every ditch, every shadowed ridge. The compound. Intelligence had flagged it weeks ago. A fortified stronghold. 50 fighters at least. 50 against 1. 50 against 12 bound men. Radio chatter filled the background, commanders barking orders, QRF scrambling to plan. 2, maybe 3 hours before helicopters could spin, before the assault force could assemble. But the prisoners didn't have hours. Ellie knew it. She could almost see the enemy, cameras ready, knives gleaming, staging a scene the world would never forget. Her chest tightened. A voice inside whispered, "Someone needs to act." But who? Not her, not the cook. Yet the thought didn't leave. It grew. It hardened. She thought of her father's words on a hunting ridge in Montana, snow blinding, lungs burning. If you wait too long, Ellie, you lose the shot. Patience is everything until it is. When the moment comes, you take it, or you live with the silence. Her hand trembled as she set down the spoon. She wiped it quickly on a towel, hiding the motion from the others. Outwardly calm, inwardly burning. She stayed long enough to keep the illusion intact. Then she slipped out, her feet carrying her toward her quarters before her mind could argue. Inside, she moved with quiet precision. Combat utilities pulled from the locker, body armor strapped tight, the familiar weight of her M4 across her chest. She loaded magazines, hands steady, water, medical kit, rope, knife. She wasn't building a plan as much as letting instinct take over. Her father's ghost hovered over every motion. When she stepped outside, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was there, blocking the path. Mitchell's face was drawn, eyes sharp with disbelief. "Harris, what are you doing? You're not QRF." Ellie met her gaze, voice level. "Ma'am, they don't have 3 hours." Mitchell's lips parted, searching for argument. She found the obvious one. "You're a cook. You can't conduct a solo rescue. That's suicide." Ellie's response came like stone. "With respect, ma'am, I can, and I will. Someone has to move now." Silence stretched between them. In Mitchell's eyes, Ellie saw not just doubt but fear, the fear of responsibility. If she let Ellie go, she risked her career. If she stopped her, she risked 12 lives. Finally, Mitchell made a choice that would haunt her. She pressed a small radio into Ellie's hand. "Officially, I'm ordering you back to duty. Unofficially, if you're going anyway, keep me informed. I'll cover the gap as long as I can." Ellie's throat tightened. She nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." And then she turned toward the wire. Her boots sank into dust. The base fell behind her. Every step was heavy with finality, but her mind was clear. She wasn't walking away from her job. She was walking toward the moment she'd been shaped for her whole life. Toward a compound 5 kilometers away where 12 men waited on the edge of death. Toward a war no one believed she could fight. And as she moved into the emptiness, one thought pulsed in her chest. "They think I'm just the cook. Let them." What kind of person walks into enemy territory alone? The question nagged at her with every step, but Ellie never slowed. 5 kilometers. It sounded small on paper, a simple number on a map. But out here in land ruled by ambush and silence, it was an ocean. One wrong step could be the end. She kept low, her body folding into the terrain as if the earth itself were an ally. The Montana wilderness had trained her for this, hours of stalking through forests where every snapped twig could spook elk 3 ridgelines away. Here, the prey had rifles and the patience of men waiting for blood. She matched them with patience of her own. Every 50 steps she paused, listened. waited. Her breath slowed until her heartbeat was the only drum she knew. The base fell silent behind her, swallowed by distance. Ahead, the faint hum of life, shadows moving against the far hills, voices carried just enough on the wind to remind her she was close. She adjusted her grip on the M4, fingers brushing against worn metal, the weapon an extension of something she hadn't been allowed to show. Why had she hidden it so long? That thought flickered like a match. Maybe because if she had spoken up, shown what she was, someone would have shut it down, dismissed her like they always did, just a cook, just food service, not worth the risk, not worth the recognition. Tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, all that mattered was that 12 Americans had hours left to live. 2 hours into her crawl, the compound rose in the distance. It wasn't grand, wasn't imposing, mud walls, stone outcroppings, sheets of corrugated metal hammered together, but Ellie knew better. She counted towers, counted firing lanes, counted silhouettes leaning lazy against walls, rifles slung loose. 50 men at least, maybe more. And at the center, a courtyard where bodies were bound and forced to kneel. Through her scope she found them. SEALs, 12 shadows stripped of weapons, faces bruised and heads bowed. The sight tightened something inside her chest. She served them food days ago, heard their laughter, caught fragments of their stories. Now they were prizes, trophies for an enemy eager to turn their suffering into theater. Cameras waited on tripods. A pit had been dug in the ground, shallow, but enough to mean something final. She closed her eyes briefly. It would be easy to freeze here, to let the fear win. What could one person do against 50? The rational voice screamed it. Walk away. Let the QRF come. But she thought of her father's words again, when the moment comes you take it, or you live with the silence. She keyed the radio, whispering. Harris in position. Confirmed 12 alive. Guards 20 around prisoners, 30 on perimeter. Execution prep in progress. Mitchell's voice came back, taut with disbelief. Harris, QRF is still 2 hours out. Can you hold? Ellie's eyes stayed locked on the bound men. One of them coughed blood onto the dirt. Negative, ma'am. They don't have 2 hours going in. Mitchell's reply was a crack of desperation. Harris, wait. Ellie clicked the radio off. The silence after was deafening. She began with the towers. The men there were alert but not expecting a ghost. She lined up her first shot, controlled her breathing the way her father had taught her. Inhale, hold, the crosshairs slowed. Exhale, squeeze. The man crumpled before he understood death had found him. She shifted immediately, moving through brush, never giving the night a chance to fix her position. Second shot. A man leaning against a wall slumped forward as if sleep had taken him. Third, fourth. Each one carefully placed, each one erasing a piece of the perimeter. She wasn't fast, she wasn't loud. She was deliberate, methodical. For 30 minutes she circled death around the compound, cutting threads until the web sagged. 8 men gone before anyone realized the holes were widening. She used the pauses to study patterns, the way guards rotated near the courtyard, the way cigarettes flared at intervals, the way laughter drifted in careless bursts. Patterns meant predictability. Predictability meant opportunity. When the south side thinned, she saw her path. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was, but it was the only way. Her scope settled on the courtyard. The SEALs were bound with rope, not chains. A mistake. The guards clustered too close, too confident. They didn't fear rescue, didn't think anyone would dare. That arrogance was their weakness. Ellie waited. The guard rotation shifted. For a heartbeat, attention fractured, men trading places, steps echoing on stone. She moved. Her rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times, and guards dropped in rapid succession. The prisoners flinched, confusion snapping through their bodies, unsure if the fire was aimed at them. Then more guards fell. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Men shouted in panic, running for cover instead of tightening control. Ellie's voice cut across the air, harsh and unrecognizable even to herself. She'd taken a radio from a downed guard, and now it carried into the courtyard. SEAL Team 7, friendly forces, cut bonds, south wall, move. Inside, Chief Johnson froze. He knew that voice, couldn't place it but knew the authority in it. His wrists bled from the rope, but he twisted, strained, finally pulling free. He cut others loose, moving like a man resurrected. The seals surged, broken but not destroyed. Ellie's trigger finger never stopped. Every shadow that rose to block their path, she answered. Controlled bursts, never wasteful. She felt the rhythm of it, the old dance of hunter and hunted. But tonight she was both. The seals stumbled toward the south wall, bodies weakened but spirits lit by desperation. Johnson looked up as they reached the breach. And there she was. Ellie Harris, the cook he'd patronized, crouched in combat gear, her rifle still warm, scanning the horizon with calm precision. His words spilled out without thinking. "Harris, what the hell are you?" "Rescuing you, Chief," she cut him off. Her eyes didn't leave her scope. "Move, they're regrouping." For once he had no argument, he followed. The escape was chaos layered on chaos. The compound roared with enemy fire, but Ellie guided them through shadows, every step chosen, every pause calculated. She became the map they didn't have, the patience they couldn't afford. Men stumbled, but she pulled them up. Shots cracked too close, but she answered them before they found targets. Chief Johnson moved beside her, disbelief still etched in his face. "Where the hell did you learn to move like this?" Her response was as clipped as her shooting. "Montana. My father was a sniper instructor." He stared. "Then why the hell are you a cook?" "Because troops need to eat, Chief. Doesn't mean I can't do other things when necessary." The ground stretched before them, a brutal 5 kilometers they had to cross again, but this time carrying the weight of escape, the weight of being hunted. Ellie felt it pressing on her lungs, but she pushed forward. Every hill was a shield, every ditch a sanctuary. She never stopped calculating. Behind them, shouts rose, enemy voices calling pursuit. They didn't have long, but forward, always forward. And in the quiet between gunfire and footsteps, a thought burned in Ellie's chest. For years they'd called her just the cook. Tonight they would see what that meant. How far can broken men run before the weight of pursuit drags them back down? That was the question Ellie wrestled with as the ground shook beneath their boots. 12 seals, battered and starved, stumbling through dust and stone with rifles freshly stolen from their captors. And her, the outlier, still steady, still carrying the burden of every decision. Behind them the compound boiled over with fury. Shouts in harsh voices, gunfire cracking against the night, pursuit teams breaking free like wolves on a trail. 50 fighters had been surprised once. They would not be again. Ellie raised her fist, signaling halt. The seals collapsed behind boulders, gasping, some coughing blood. She scanned with her scope, the glass sweeping across ridgelines and dry creek beds. Movement flared like sparks, enemy silhouettes flooding the ground they just left. "They're coming fast," Johnson muttered beside her, chest heaving. His face was pale beneath grime. "Half our men can barely stand." Ellie's voice was low but firm. "Then we slow them here." She studied the terrain. Montana lessons whispered again, never fight on the enemy's terms. Use the land, force them into choke points. She pointed to a narrow pass between 2 jagged rocks, barely wide enough for 3 men abreast. "They'll funnel through there. We hold them for 5 minutes. Buy time." The seals exchanged looks, torn between doubt and desperation. But in her voice there was no hesitation. Johnson nodded. "You heard her. Set positions." It felt strange, giving orders to men who had bled and trained for years while she chopped onions in a kitchen tent. But here, stripped of titles, only capability mattered, and she had it. They took positions, rifles aimed into the choke point. Ellie lay prone, cheek pressed to the stock of her M4, her breathing calm despite the pounding in her chest. She counted heartbeats, listened to the crunch of approaching boots. Then the first figures appeared, shouts erupted, gunfire blazed. Ellie's world narrowed to her scope. A head rose above the rock she squeezed. A body crumpled. Another darted left, she shifted, exhaled, fired. each shot deliberate, each one answering the chaos with precision. Around her, the seals fired bursts, their weakened arms shaking but steady enough under her covering rhythm. The enemy pushed hard, trying to flood the gap, but the pass betrayed them. They stacked too close, their bodies creating obstacles for one another. Ellie's rifle cracked again and again, cutting the line like scissors through rope. 5 minutes stretched into eternity, then Johnson tapped her shoulder. "That's enough, move." She rose, legs burning, heart refusing to admit how close she'd come to staying. They fell back again, the seals stumbling forward, clinging to the hope of distance. But hope was fragile. The enemy wouldn't stop. Already, Ellie heard their fury building again, footsteps pounding the earth like drums of vengeance. By the second kilometer, exhaustion gnawed at them all. One seal stumbled hard, collapsing into the dirt. Ellie was at his side before anyone else. She hauled him up, his weight sagging against her. "On your feet. Now." "I can't," his voice broke. "You can, or you die here." Her eyes locked on his, fierce enough to burn away hesitation. Slowly he rose, leaning into her shoulder. She carried half his weight without faltering. Johnson saw it, and something shifted in his gaze. No more disbelief, only respect born from survival. Still, fear pressed against her ribs. She wasn't invincible, she knew it. Any bullet could end this. Any mistake could erase everything. And worse, if she failed, these men would die with her. Her father's voice came again, a memory from a snowy ridge. "Pressure isn't the enemy, Ellie. Fear is. Fear makes you rush. Rushing makes you miss. Trust your training, trust your patience." She breath slowed, forced herself to think. They needed a rally point, somewhere to vanish until QRF could arrive. Her eyes scanned the darkness, searching for salvation in shapes of stone. Then she saw it, a dry riverbed cut deep into the earth, winding like a scar. Its banks would shield them from view if they could reach it. "Down there," she hissed, pointing. The seals followed without question now, sliding into the trench, dropping one by one into the shadows. The earth swallowed them, muffling their noise. Ellie dropped last, rifle raised, scanning the rim. The pursuit arrived minutes later. She could hear them on the ridge above, voices sharp with anger. Lights swept the ground, beams passing just meters overhead. The seals pressed into the dirt, every breath held, every muscle rigid. Ellie lay still, her finger on the trigger, resisting the urge to fire. One shot would give them away. Silence was the only shield now. A flashlight paused directly above, its beam lingering. Her chest tightened. If they looked down, if they stepped closer. The moment stretched like glass. Then a voice barked in the distance, calling them forward. The light moved on. Footsteps faded. Only then did Ellie breathe again. She whispered into the radio, voice steady despite the quake in her hands. "Mitchell Harris, prisoners secured. Moving to rally point. Hostile pursuit ongoing." Mitchell's reply crackled through static. "Copy. QRF 30 minutes out. Hold position." 30 minutes. It sounded impossible, but 30 minutes was survival. The seals slumped against the dirt walls, their bodies trembling from exhaustion. Ellie crouched among them, eyes scanning the rim, ears tuned to every sound. Johnson slid down beside her, his chest still heaving. "You saved us back there," he admitted quietly. His tone carried none of the earlier condescension, only truth. "We'd have never made it out without you." Ellie didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. "Don't thank me yet, we're not home." Silence settled. Only the sound of breathing, the faint hum of night insects, the pounding of hearts too stubborn to quit. Ellie thought about how strange it was that the girl everyone had dismissed, the cook with flour on her hands, was now the anchor keeping 12 warriors alive. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't sought it. But maybe fate didn't care what you wanted. Maybe it only asked one question: when the moment comes, will you take it? Minutes crawled by. Every rustle in the distance was an enemy. Every gust of wind carried dread. But still they waited, still they held. And in that waiting, Ellie felt something settle inside her, a truth she'd always known but never spoken. She wasn't just the cook. She never had been. What does survival feel like when you're not sure you deserve it? That was the strange heaviness pressing down on Ellie's chest as the minutes bled away in the dry riverbed. The seals crouched around her, heads bowed, weapons clutched tight, their breath coming in ragged gasps. They were alive. For now. But life here felt like a fragile loan, ready to be repossessed at the enemy's whim. The distant thrum of helicopters broke the silence first, a vibration that trembled through the dirt beneath their boots. QRF. Relief, swift and brutal, crashed into the trench. Some SEALs slumped, muttering thanks, curses, prayers, but Ellie's jaw tightened. The fight wasn't finished. Relief was dangerous. Relief made men careless. She raised her hand, signaling silence. "Stay down," she hissed. Her voice had grown sharp, the edge of command that didn't belong to her rank but belonged to this moment. "Not yet. They'll circle. Cover me." Johnson met her eyes. He didn't argue, he just nodded. The helicopters roared overhead minutes later, searchlights stabbing across the terrain. The night erupted in chaos again, enemy gunfire streaking skyward, tracers like red veins clawing at the sky. Ellie and the SEALs stayed hidden, watching as the QRF engaged from above, rockets slamming into the compound they'd fled. Fire bloomed in the distance, smoke clawing toward the stars. "Move," Ellie ordered, pulling the SEALs from the trench. They scrambled up, legs shaking but adrenaline pushing them forward. She led them toward the rally point she'd memorized hours ago, every step an act of defiance against the fatigue threatening to break her body. At the designated clearing, QRF operators were already establishing a perimeter. Shouts echoed. Hands grabbed, pulling SEALs into security positions, medics rushing forward. The 12 broken men were swallowed by a machine designed for recovery. Ellie stood at the edge of it, dust streaked across her face, rifle still hot in her hands. For the first time since leaving base, she let herself exhale. A voice cut through the noise. "Harris." Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, the QRF commander, strode toward her. The disbelief on her face was palpable, disbelief and something heavier. She stopped inches away, studying Ellie as though she couldn't reconcile what she saw. "I just got the sitrep," Hayes said, voice low but sharp. "Chief Johnson says you conducted a solo infiltration, eliminated guards, freed 12 prisoners, led them through hostile territory." Ellie's eyes stayed steady. "Yes, ma'am." Hayes' stare didn't waver. "You're a culinary specialist, second class, not a SEAL, not even combat assigned. What you did was unauthorized, reckless, outside every regulation we have." Ellie straightened her shoulders, refusing to flinch. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." "Do you?" Hayes pressed. "Do you understand that if you'd failed, we'd be recovering bodies instead of survivors? That your decision risked not just your life, but their lives, our mission, and the Navy's credibility?" "Yes, ma'am," Ellie answered again. Her voice didn't break, but inside she felt the weight of truth. Hayes was right. Everything she had done was reckless, dangerous, impossible, and yet 12 men were alive. Chief Johnson appeared then, limping but unbowed. His voice was rough, but it carried conviction. "Ma'am, with respect, Harris saved us. We were hours from execution. QRF would have been too late. She moved alone, eliminated threats, and let us out. What she did was extraordinary." Hayes looked at him, then back at Ellie. Conflict warred in her eyes, duty against gratitude, regulation against survival. Finally, she exhaled. "You'll face an investigation. You'll answer for leaving your post, for acting without orders. But for now," she paused, her voice softening, "you brought them home. That matters." Ellie nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." The helicopters ferried them back to Vanguard under the cloak of night. The compound burned in the distance, enemy fire finally smothered. Ellie sat wedged between Johnson and another SEAL, the vibration of the rotors rattling through her bones. The men were silent, exhausted beyond words. Some leaned against one another, heads nodding in sleep. Others stared blankly at the floor, lost in memories already heavy with trauma. Ellie stayed awake. Her hands clutched her rifle, her mind replaying every step, every shot, every decision. She wondered if she should feel proud. Instead, she felt hollow, as if the price hadn't been paid yet. Back at Vanguard, the base erupted in controlled chaos. Medics swarmed the rescued SEALs. Officers demanded reports. Radios buzzed with transmissions flying up the chain of command. Ellie tried to slip away quietly, but Hayes stopped her. "No," the commander said firmly. "You're not disappearing back into the kitchen, not tonight." Ellie froze as eyes turned toward her. Soldiers and sailors watched, whispers spreading. The cook who'd gone missing hours ago was back, dirt-streaked, armor dented, weapons still locked and loaded. And she wasn't alone. She brought 12 SEALs with her. The murmurs cut deeper than any bullet. Some were disbelief, some were awe, some were resentment. Ellie kept her face blank, but inside her chest something churned. A storm of shame, pride, and defiance all tangled together. Later, when the chaos dimmed, she found herself in a makeshift debriefing room. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was there, eyes wide with a mix of relief and dread. Captain Richard Morrison, the investigating officer flown in for the task, sat with a notepad, his expression unreadable. He began simply, "Why, Harris? Why did you walk out of your duty station and into a firefight you weren't trained or authorized to fight?" Ellie thought carefully before answering. "Because I knew the SEALs would be executed before the QRF arrived, sir. I had the skills to get there fast. If I didn't act, they would die." Morrison's pen scratched across the page. "And why did nobody know you had those skills?" Ellie's throat tightened. She thought of the years in Montana, of her father's lessons, of the choice she'd made to stay invisible. She swallowed. "Because people saw my rating, sir. They assumed that's all I was. Nobody asked what else I could do." Silence lingered. Mitchell broke it softly. "She's telling the truth. Harris is exceptional. I reviewed her file months ago, her weapons qualifications, her combat training. She chose culinary specialist for reasons of her own, but her capability extends far beyond food service." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Then why stay hidden? Why not apply for a combat billet? Why not make your skills known?" Ellie's voice was quiet now, heavy with truth. "Because I watched women in combat roles fight twice as hard for half as much recognition. Because I didn't want to spend my career proving I belonged instead of serving. So I chose a job that would let me deploy without fighting that battle. Cooking gave me cover. It gave me purpose. But it didn't take away what I could do." Morrison studied her for a long time. His face betrayed nothing, but his pen slowed. Finally, he leaned back. "You'll face consequences, Harris. Unauthorized absence. Unauthorized combat operations. That's unavoidable. But the fact remains you brought 12 men back alive. That's something we cannot ignore." Ellie lowered her gaze. She wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or condemned. That night, when the base finally quieted, she sat alone outside the mess tent. The stars stretched endless overhead, cold and brilliant. She thought about the SEALs asleep in the medical bay. She thought about her father's lessons. She thought about how close it had all come to ending differently. And she wondered, what did it mean to be more than the title people gave you? Could she ever go back to being just the cook? Would anyone let her? She didn't know. But one truth had settled in her chest, unshakable. She had walked into hell and walked back out, not because it was her job, but because no one else could. And the men who once saw her as invisible now carried her name in silence, etched into their survival. How do you sit still when the walls themselves feel like judgment? Ellie sat at the narrow table, her back rigid, hands folded to hide the tremor she couldn't quiet. The room smelled of paper and dust, a makeshift courtroom assembled in the desert. Captain Richard Morrison sat opposite her, silver hair cropped close, his posture stiff as stone. A recorder clicked softly on the desk between them, its red light blinking like an unblinking eye. "You are under investigation," Morrison began, his voice steady, practiced. For unauthorized absence from your assigned duty station. For engaging in combat operations outside your rating and chain of command. For disobeying direct orders. Do you understand these charges, Petty Officer Harris? Yes, sir. Her voice was low, controlled. Inside, though, she felt her chest tighten. Every word, every regulation was a chain tightening around her throat. And yet, Morrison continued, his gaze narrowing, you are also being recommended for the Navy Cross, for actions that, if true, demonstrate extraordinary heroism in combat. He leaned forward slightly. So which is it, Harris, reckless insubordination or extraordinary valor? Ellie didn't look away. Maybe both, sir. The silence that followed was heavier than any firefight she'd survived. Morrison tapped his pen against the table, his expression unreadable. You're aware, he said finally, that if you'd been killed, the Navy would be explaining to the world why a culinary specialist was found dead outside the wire, weapon in hand. That your decision risked not only your life, but the credibility of this command. Ellie nodded, yes, sir. Then why? The question came sharper now, almost a demand. Why did you leave your post? Why not wait for the QRF? Why take it on yourself? Her throat tightened. She thought of the courtyard, of 12 men bound and waiting for death. She thought of the pit they dug in the dirt, shallow but cruel. Her voice, when it came, was steady. Because they didn't have time, sir, I knew it. The QRF would have been too late, someone had to move, and I knew I could. Morrison's pen froze over his notepad. His eyes searched hers as though trying to catch a flicker of arrogance, of self-glory. But there was none, only truth. Later that day, testimony began. One by one, men filed into the room. The rescued SEALs, gaunt but alive, their voices carrying weight that no regulation could silence. Chief Johnson was first. His limp was more pronounced now, but his voice was firm. Sir, Harris saved our lives. I won't dress it up. We were done, hours from execution. She came alone, infiltrated a fortified compound, eliminated guards with precision I'd expect from a sniper, not a cook, and freed us. She led us through hostile territory like she'd trained her whole life for it. Without her, none of us would be here. Morrison raised a brow. Chief, do you expect me to believe a culinary specialist performed a rescue operation that doctrine says is impossible? Johnson didn't blink. I don't expect you to believe it, sir. I expect you to listen to 12 men who watched it happen. The room stilled. Morrison wrote something, but his jaw was tight. Other SEALs followed. Their words differed in detail, but not in truth. Each painted the same picture. Ellie Harris moving like a ghost, shooting like a sniper, steady as stone while chaos burned around her. Men hardened by war spoke with unguarded respect, their voices rough with something more than gratitude. When the last of them left, the silence returned. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. 12 special operators, he said slowly, all crediting you with their survival. It would be easier if they disagreed. Ellie didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the table, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. Then Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell entered. Her testimony was softer but no less cutting. She spoke of reviewing Ellie's file, of weapon scores and training rarely attempted by support personnel. I knew she had capabilities beyond her rating, Mitchell admitted, her voice tinged with regret. But I didn't push it. I let the system define her. She chose culinary specialist for her own reasons, but her potential was wider than any of us allowed ourselves to see. Morrison's gaze sharpened. Why didn't anyone know? Why didn't you elevate her capabilities? Mitchell hesitated, then answered with quiet honesty. Because we judge people by job titles, sir. We look at their rating badge and assume it defines their value. Harris was a cook, so we assumed she cooked. We never looked deeper. Ellie closed her eyes briefly. The words cut sharper than gunfire because they were true. She hadn't asked to be seen. But now, after everything, the weight of invisibility felt unbearable. When the testimonies ended, Morrison dismissed her. Ellie left the room, the desert night wrapping around her like a cloak. She walked past tents glowing faintly with lamplight, past soldiers who glanced at her with whispers that she didn't want to hear. Hero, reckless, cook, warrior. She wasn't sure which one she was anymore. At the mess tent she paused, the same stainless steel counters, the same smell of coffee grounds, the same clatter of pans. It felt surreal. Hours ago she'd stood here serving breakfast. Now she'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She sat alone at one of the empty tables, staring at her hands. They still smelled faintly of gunpowder, not garlic. And she wondered, would she ever be allowed to hold a ladle again without seeing blood? A shadow fell across the table. Johnson stood there, arms crossed, his gaze heavy. "You did good, Harris." She looked up at him, weary. "Did I?" "You brought us home. That's more than good." Her chest ached. "I broke every rule to do it. They're right, Chief. I wasn't authorized. I wasn't supposed to." Johnson pulled out a chair, sitting across from her. His voice softened, though the gravel never left it. "Rules matter, but sometimes lives matter more. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Ellie swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that breaking rules could be forgiven when the cost was life. But the weight of command wasn't hers to carry. That decision would belong to people like Morrison. That night she barely slept. Every creak of the base, every gust of desert wind pulled her awake. Her dreams were filled with the courtyard, the ropes, the pit. She saw the seals bound again, waiting. And she saw herself, rifle in hand, stepping forward into the fire. Each time she woke with her heart racing, her hands trembling. 3 weeks later the findings came. She was summoned to the same makeshift room. Morrison sat with a folder before him, his expression carved in stone. "Petty Officer Harris," he began, "the investigation has concluded. You are officially reprimanded for unauthorized absence and unauthorized combat operations. This reprimand will remain in your permanent record." He paused, then continued. "However, you are also awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. Few have ever received both a reprimand and such a decoration for the same action, but few have ever forced us to confront what you have." The words struck like twin blows, punishment and honor intertwined. Ellie stood motionless, unsure whether to feel proud or ashamed. Morrison's eyes softened for the first time. "Whatever your rating, whatever your title, you demonstrated capabilities beyond expectation. The Navy is reassessing how we evaluate our people because of you. That may be your greatest contribution." Ellie nodded faintly. "Yes, sir." When she left the room, the base felt different. Not safer, not friendlier, just changed. The whispers were louder now, but mixed with something else, respect. That night Ellie stood outside, staring at the desert stars. She thought of her father, of Montana, of elk hunts in silence. She thought of the seals sleeping in their cots, alive because of choices she could never undo. And she thought of the strange duality now written into her life, condemned and celebrated, punished and honored, invisible no longer. For the first time, she wondered what came next. Was she still the cook? Or had something far larger been set in motion, something that would demand more of her than she had ever given before? What do you do when the world suddenly sees you for what you always knew you were? Ellie asked herself that question as the days after the investigation blurred into something new, something heavier. The reprimand stung, etched permanently into her record like a scar that would never fade. But the Navy Cross burned brighter, a medal she had never sought, now heavy in her hands. Punishment and honor, chains and wings, both at once. Word of her actions spread faster than she could hide. Seals she'd never met nodded in the chow hall, quiet gestures of respect. Logistics clerks whispered when she passed, their eyes carrying questions they didn't dare voice. Some voices called her reckless, lucky, foolish. Others called her a legend. Ellie hated both. She wasn't a cautionary tale or a hero. She was just someone who couldn't let 12 men die while she stirred soup. But the Navy was not built to let stories like hers fade quietly. Within weeks, an offer came. Not framed as a request, not quite an order, but something in between. She was to attend screening for Naval Special Warfare Support training, an opportunity offered to very few, almost never to those outside combat ratings. She stared at the paper, hands trembling. For years she'd chosen invisibility. For years she'd let the world call her cook because it was easier to serve quietly than to fight for permission to be more. But now she had no choice. The curtain was gone. The Navy had seen what she could do. They wanted more. Her first day at screening was a blur of sand, salt water, and shouted orders. She stood in a line of men younger, stronger, louder. They glanced at her, some smirking, some indifferent, some openly hostile. She knew the look. She'd seen it her entire career. What's the cook doing here? The instructors wasted no time. Hours of physical punishment, push-ups in wet sand, log carries across shoulders, sprints into surf and back. Her arms screamed, her legs burned, her lungs begged for mercy. But she gave none. Each time her body threatened collapse, she remembered the courtyard. She remembered ropes around wrists, bruises on faces, the silence before execution. She remembered that she had walked alone where none of these men had. That memory was fuel. When one candidate mocked her during a break, muttering, "Should have stayed in the kitchen," Ellie didn't respond. She just picked up the log again, carried her end without faltering. Hours later, when he dropped out, his silence was louder than his earlier sneer. But training wasn't just about strength. It was about endurance, about grit, about refusing to quit when every cell screamed for surrender. Ellie had been forged in that fire long before she wore a uniform. Montana winters, elk hunts that stretched for days, a father who taught patience sharper than steel. Pain wasn't new, it was familiar. Still, doubt haunted her. Alone in the barracks at night, muscles trembling, she asked herself the questions the Navy never asked out loud. Could she measure up to men who had spent their careers preparing for this? Did saving 12 lives make her ready for the weight of many more? Was she chasing recognition now, or simply answering a call she'd hidden too long? Her only answer came in silence. She pressed through. Weeks became months. The attrition rate was brutal. Men dropped out, their dreams crushed beneath the weight of exhaustion. Ellie stayed, not because she was the strongest, but because she was stubborn enough to remain when everything said leave. Her instructors noticed. They couldn't ignore it. She wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, but she never quit. And her shooting, on the range, her bullets carved holes in the center of targets while others scattered shots wide. Her patience made her deadly. One instructor, a veteran sniper, watched her groupings with narrowed eyes. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. Ellie's answer was quiet: "Montana." He said nothing more, but his nod carried weight. Outside training, the Navy itself began to shift. Her story rippled through ranks far from vanguard. Support ratings, cooks, logisticians, mechanics stood a little taller. For years, they'd been background noise to the music of war. But Ellie's actions whispered something new. Capability didn't live in titles. It lived in people. Chief Johnson became her loudest advocate. At briefings and training lectures, he spoke bluntly. "We almost died because we assumed the cook couldn't fight. Harris proved us wrong. You want to know the most dangerous person on a base? It's not always the one with the trident or the ranger tab. Sometimes it's the one you don't notice until it's too late." The culture didn't change overnight. Some clung to old hierarchies. Some dismissed her as an anomaly, a fluke, not proof of anything larger. But seeds had been planted, seeds she hadn't meant to sow. Ellie felt that weight pressing heavier with each week of training. She wasn't just carrying her own story anymore. She was carrying the hopes of thousands of support personnel who saw in her a crack in the wall that had held them back. She hated it in some ways. She hadn't set out to change culture. She just wanted to save lives. But sometimes history doesn't care about intent. It only cares about outcome. Her final evaluation came on a stormy morning, waves crashing against the shore, rain cutting like knives. The candidates were ordered into the surf, logs above their heads, bodies shivering in unison. The instructors prowled the shoreline, voices cutting through wind and thunder. One instructor stopped in front of Ellie. His eyes burned into hers. "Harris, you shouldn't be here, you know that, a cook, a support rating, you don't belong." The words were meant to break her. Instead, they lit something inside her chest. She tightened her grip on the log, her body shaking but her voice steady. "With respect, instructor, I've been hearing that my whole career, and I'm still here." The silence that followed was louder than the storm. The instructor's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. He barked for them to keep moving, but the test was already passed. Weeks later, Ellie stood before the flag, her uniform crisp, her body scarred but unbroken. She had completed the training pipeline, one of the few women to ever do so. Not because she'd wanted to prove anything, but because she refused to quit when quitting would have been easy. Her orders came through. She would serve as a special operations combat medic, a role that blended her old life with her new culinary skills turned to nutrition and care. Montana fieldcraft sharpened into battlefield medicine, marksmanship tempered with patience. It wasn't about glory. It was about being useful where it mattered most. When the ceremony ended, when the applause faded, Ellie stood alone at the edge of the parade ground. She thought about the girl who had once stirred soup, invisible. She thought about the 12 men bound in the courtyard. She thought about the whisper that had followed her everywhere, just the cook. And she realized something. She hadn't disproved it. She transformed it. Because maybe being just the cook had always been her strength, serving quietly, unseen, underestimated, until the moment came when she was. The Navy was changing around her now, policies rewritten, evaluations restructured, capabilities reassessed. Support personnel were being given chances to prove themselves beyond their titles, and Ellie Harris, whether she liked it or not, had become the reason. She wasn't comfortable with that. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to do her job, but maybe that was the lesson all along. Sometimes the people who change the world never set out to. What does it mean to carry two identities at once? Ellie asked herself that often, years after Vanguard. In her uniform now, she wore no cook's badge. She had passed the crucible, earned her place among special operations. On paper, she was a combat medic. In truth, she was something more complicated. Still the woman who had fed men before they fought, still the Montana daughter who learned patience in snow, but also the soldier who had walked alone into hell. Her first mission as a medic blurred the line between those selves. A raid in a valley where enemy fighters hid among stone houses, the air sharp with the smell of dust and gunpowder. She wasn't the one kicking down doors. She wasn't first through the breach, but she was always close, always waiting for the inevitable cry, "Medic." And it came. She sprinted through gunfire, sliding into a courtyard where a teammate bled from his thigh. Her hands moved faster than thought, tourniquet high, pressure dressing firm, IV inserted with precision. Around her, rifles cracked, shouts echoed, chaos swirled. But Ellie was calm, the world shrinking to the rhythm of a pulse beneath her fingers. "You're good," she whispered to the wounded man, her voice steady. "You're not leaving me." He lived, and when the team regrouped, scarred but intact, eyes turned to her with the same respect they once reserved for only the shooters. She wasn't just saving lives in kitchens anymore. She was saving them in fire. But with that respect came weight. Every life she touched, every wound she dressed, every heartbeat she fought to keep alive pressed heavier into her soul. Cooking had been about sustenance. This was about survival, and sometimes, despite her best hands, survival didn't come. The first time she lost someone, it broke her in ways gunfire never could. A young operator hit by shrapnel in the chest. Ellie's hands worked desperately, pressure, airway, adrenaline, the whole sequence drilled into her bones, but nothing brought him back. She felt the pulse fade under her palms, felt his chest rise once more, then still forever. Silence fell in the aftermath. The team looked at her, not with blame but with grief mirrored in their eyes. She had done everything right, but right wasn't always enough. That night, alone in her bunk, Ellie's hand still shook, phantom blood clinging to her skin. She whispered into the dark as if her father might hear, "Patience doesn't fix death." But she kept going, because war didn't stop for grief. Over the years, Ellie's reputation grew. She became the medic who could move like a ghost, shoot like a sniper, and heal like a surgeon. She wasn't loud about it, she never sought spotlight, but among those who served beside her, her name carried weight. Not a legend, not a myth, something quieter, a certainty. If Ellie was on your team, you had a better chance of coming home. That certainty brought her closer to Johnson again. The chief, now older, grayer, carried his own scars but remained her fiercest advocate. He often told new operators the story of Vanguard. Some rolled their eyes at first, dismissing it as embellished war talk, until they saw Ellie in action, until they watched her move through a firefight unshaken, deliberate. Then they believed. But Ellie herself carried no comfort in belief. She carried questions. Late nights on deployment, when the hum of generators filled the air and the desert stretched endless beyond the wire, she asked herself things she couldn't voice to anyone else. Was she defined by what she'd done that night at Vanguard? Was she forever the cook who became a warrior, the woman who stepped outside her lane and rewrote it in blood? Or was she just another soldier now, no different from the rest? She thought of her father often. He'd never seen her in uniform. He'd died years before she enlisted, but his voice haunted her choices, his lessons a constant companion. Patience, silence, the shot that matters. He would have been proud of her, she knew, but she also wondered, would he have been proud of the cost? Because the cost was mounting. Her body bore scars, but those healed. Her mind carried scars that didn't. The faces of the saved and the lost alike lived inside her. Some nights she heard their voices. Some nights she felt the weight of all the times she'd failed, even when failure wasn't hers to own. And yet she kept stepping forward, because the alternative, stepping back, felt like betrayal. Years passed, missions blurred, wars shifted from one valley to another, one enemy named to the next, but Ellie's role remained constant. The quiet resilience, the hand steady in chaos, the ghost in combat boots. The Navy itself shifted with her. Policies changed. Evaluations broadened. Support personnel were offered pathways to show skills once hidden. Cooking ratings were still filled, logistics still vital, but the walls around them thinned. Ellie's story had become part of the curriculum at training commands, not celebrated with parades but taught as lesson. Never underestimate. Ellie hated being a lesson, but she couldn't deny the truth it carried. During one deployment, she stood before a group of new support sailors, cooks, clerks, mechanics. She hadn't asked to speak, but command insisted. She looked at their young faces, wide-eyed and eager, waiting for inspiration. She kept it simple. Your rating doesn't define your worth. It defines part of it, sure. But you are more than your badge. Train, learn, be ready. Because one day, maybe, nobody will ask what you can do. They'll just need you to do it. The room was silent when she finished. Not applause, not cheers, just silence, the kind that meant the words had settled deep. Later she sat alone, staring at her reflection in a window. Was that who she was now? A story to tell others, a warning, a symbol. She didn't want to be any of it, she just wanted to serve. But service had changed her. She was no longer the invisible cook. She was the medic who walked between life and death, carrying the burden of both. And the question that haunted her most wasn't whether she was worthy. It was whether she could endure the weight of always being the one people underestimated until the moment they couldn't. Because being underestimated had once been her shield. Now it was her shadow. What does it mean to end a journey you never meant to start? Ellie asked herself that on the morning of her retirement ceremony. 20 years had passed since Vanguard. 20 years since she'd walked out of the chow hall with a rifle across her chest and into history she never asked to make. The mirror showed a woman older, lines etched at the corners of her eyes, hair streaked with gray but still tied back in the same no-nonsense ponytail. The uniform was crisp, the ribbons heavy across her chest. At the center, the Navy Cross gleamed, a medal both burden and blessing. Around it, other decorations told their stories, but none of them mattered as much as the silence of the men and women who weren't here to see them. The auditorium at the Naval Academy was filled. Young midshipmen in spotless whites, senior officers in rows, friends and comrades who had walked through decades of war. They rose when she entered, the applause sharp, echoing, but Ellie felt only the weight of expectation pressing against her shoulders. She stepped to the podium. For a long moment she didn't speak. She let the silence stretch the way her father once had before pulling a trigger. Then her voice came, low but clear. When I first joined the Navy, I was a cook. People saw me with ladles and trays, and they assumed that was all I could be. I let them assume. It was easier, safer, because proving myself meant fighting battles inside the uniform before I ever got to fight outside it. She paused, scanning the young faces in the crowd. Some leaned forward, eager. Some frowned, uncertain. All were listening. But one day, when 12 men were bound in a courtyard waiting for execution, nobody asked the cook if she could help. Nobody thought she could. And if I'd waited for permission, for orders, for recognition, those 12 men would be dead. So I walked out alone, not because I was brave, not because I wanted glory, but because I couldn't live with the silence of not trying. Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. That night changed me. It changed this Navy. It taught us something we should have known all along, that capability doesn't wear a badge and worth isn't defined by a title. I wasn't less because I was a cook. I wasn't more because I became a medic or wore a different patch. I was just me, and in the right moment that was enough. The room was still. No coughs, no shuffling, just the weight of her words settling in like stone. I've been called reckless, I've been called a hero. The truth is I was both. I broke rules and I saved lives. That contradiction has followed me my whole career. But here's what I know now. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when the moment comes, when lives hang in the balance, what matters isn't your title, it's what you do. She stepped back then, letting the silence hold. Then applause erupted, thunderous, rising like a wave. Ellie bowed her head, not soaking it in but letting it pass over her. Later, outside beneath the academy's stone arches, she stood alone. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of salt from the bay. She looked up at the same stars she'd stared at in Montana, the same stars above Vanguard, the same stars over every battlefield since. Her thoughts drifted to the men she'd saved that night. Many had gone on to long careers, some still serving, some long retired. Some hadn't made it home from later wars, but all of them had lived past that courtyard because she refused to let silence win. That mattered. She thought of her father. She could almost hear his voice, calm and steady. Patience, Ellie. The shot that matters isn't the one you want to take. It's the one you have to. She smiled faintly, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. He would have understood. And she thought of all the cooks, clerks, mechanics, sailors who had come after her. The ones who stood taller now, knowing their worth wasn't defined by a rating badge. The Navy had changed. Not perfectly, not fully, but enough. Enough that invisibility wasn't the only option anymore. As the night deepened, a group of young midshipmen passed, their voices hushed with respect. One of them glanced her way, eyes wide, and whispered to the others, "That's her, Harris, the cook who went to war." Ellie almost laughed. After everything, after medals and missions and decades of service, that was still the story that clung to her. The cook who went to war. And maybe that was enough. Because being a cook had never been less. It had been the foundation, the quiet service that held others up. And when the time came, it had been the disguise that let her carry skills no one expected. Being just the cook had saved 12 men and changed a Navy. She turned her eyes back to the stars. The applause, the medals, the speeches, they would fade, but the lesson would remain. That capability hides in silence. That strength often looks ordinary. that sometimes the person you least expect is the one who changes everything. Ellie Harris had been making meals for soldiers until enemies seized her SEAL team. She had gone to war, not because it was her role, but because it was her choice. And in doing so, she proved something the world should never forget. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.